speakers today, Johanna Höffken from TU Eindhoven, the Netherlands, and from the USA, Susan Lord from University of San Diego, and Darshan Karwat from Arizona State University, for being with us today and sharing some examples and theoretical insights on how to prepare the next generation of engineering students as to take socio-technical matters and seriously and be prepared to make an impact through their work. As we aim to make our seminars interactive, feel welcome to address any comments or questions that you have to the speakers, either when we finish the presentation. So we have free presentation today, which will allow for more time for discussions, but also make use of the chat. And if you are with us for the first time, also feel welcome to introduce yourself and your research area via chat. So now I'm giving the floor to our first speaker, Darshan Karwat, who will talk about building a new field of engineering for environmental protection, justice, peace, and human rights.
Can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. Well, I just want to start off by saying how lovely it is to be speaking in such a collegial group. Seems like the community is pretty tight-knit, and I'm just happy to get to know all of you. I'm at Arizona State University, as Diana said, and I've given myself a bit of a challenge with this talk by trying to give a presentation on some, I'd say, half-formed ideas. So the idea of my talk is just to give you a sense of what I've been thinking about recently. And I'd love any comments, feedback, critiques, or criticisms of anything that I'm saying. There are three overarching questions that I tend to think about, and I try to get my group to think about. My lab group is called Re-Engineered, and three questions are: why are we engineers? For whose benefit do we work? And what is the full measure of our moral and social responsibility? Those questions are inspired by the Science for the People movement that started in the 1960s in the US. And in that context, what I like to talk about is this idea of an environmentally just field of engineering. So I've sort of narrowed the topic of discussion today from what Diana has said to focus specifically on this idea of environmental justice in engineering. And what I'd like to do today is just sort of give you a sense of how I've been thinking about it from a theoretical standpoint, and talk about some of the things that we've been doing in Re-Engineered about building it, but also present some high-level questions on how we might continue to do so. So I'd like to start off with such a question. If we can describe something the way it is, can we use that ability to describe to build something that we want? Now, as engineers, I would like to think that the answer is yes. So over here, you see the Navier-Stokes equations, conservation of mass, momentum, and energy, which were derived from lots of experimental work, lots of theorizing in the 1800s or early 1900s. And once we developed this ability to describe the way fluids flow around airfoils or through pipes, we can start doing pretty remarkable things, right? As an aerospace engineer, I love space exploration. And we can use these equations to land a car-sized rover on Mars. So going back to this question, can we maybe think about it a little bit differently? In the previous slide, I talked about something physical, right? The flow of fluids, but can we think about if we can describe what engineering as a profession is, then can we think about creating an engineering profession that we want? And I want to apologize in advance. I'm not a sort of a quote unquote trained social scientist. And so I might be using some social science language and theoretical language in ways that might not be fully accurate, but I hope I'm able to convey the sense of what I'm trying to get at. So about a year and a half ago, I came across this idea of field theory. My postdoctoral fellow, who's a sociologist, introduced me to field theory. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with field theory, I'll introduce that in just a moment. But the idea is, if we can describe the way fields are, so law as a field, or nursing as a field, or engineering as a field, and we can describe using field theory engineering the way it is, can we use the idea of field theory to build the kind of engineering that we want? So for those of you who are unfamiliar with field theory, just a few quick words on what it's about. Fields are arenas in which people express and reproduce their dispositions, where they compete for the distribution of different kinds of capital. I'll explain those in just a moment. And it's basically like a network and a set of relationships that could be intellectual, religious, educational, so on. Again, you can kind of think about law as a field and different players within law operating, competing with each other to basically express what law is. Importantly, there are things that, once we define a field, there are things that are in the field, like, oh, this is what law is about. And there are things that are outside of the field. If you ask this kind of question, or if you want to do something like that, it's no longer law, it's something else. Within a field, there are a bunch of different kinds of capital that support that field, which are basically accumulated sets of resources that are interchangeable. You can think about economic capital, which is very intuitive, right? It's like the income that one receives being in the field, or the financial store of wealth that somebody has. You can think about the networks, relationships that exist amongst people within a field that relates to social capital. You can think about cultural capital as basically like the education, the experience, the knowledge of what behaving like an engineer actually looks like, right? And lastly, you have symbolic capital, the honor, the prestige, the recognition that might come. So for example, if one of us were to win a big prize from, let's say, the American Society of Engineering Education for, a lifetime of work, or a paper or something, you getting that prize, that award, means something. And you can start using that capital to do other things, right? You can be invited into a discussion because you won an award, right? So you have these capitals, and I'll add to these capitals intellectual and philosophical capital, which I'll get to in just a moment. And lastly, there's basically the behaviors, right? How do we act within a field? So the habitus describes the norms or tendencies that guide this behavior and thinking. So it's the way in which engineering as an idea, and I'm focusing specifically on engineering, the way engineering as an idea becomes deposited in me, that, oh, as an engineer, I behave in ways X, Y, and Z. And if I did something else, I'm no longer behaving as an engineer. Now, these capitals, economic, social, cultural, and symbolic, certainly reside in us as individuals, right? Like, I make money being a professor at Arizona State University, and that comes with its set of capitals. But we can also think about capitals as a collective. So all of us within the engineering education community have economic, social, cultural, symbolic capital, and we can kind of think about the field of engineering education, right? So I just want to demonstrate on this slide, talk about the way in which different capitals might exist within engineering. So in schools, we sort of, maybe for lack of a better word, kind of like indoctrinate engineers. Like, this is what it's like to build computational fluid dynamic skills or structural analysis skills. We then, have our engineering students go to career fair and compete for jobs that may be with, large multinational corporations like BP or Raytheon. These companies are involved in building infrastructure. And then, you, as a trained engineer, might be in a work environment. I'm assuming work environments in Europe don't look like this cubicle farm that I've shown, which exist in engineering companies in the US. But you can kind of think about these pictures as demonstrating ways in which different kinds of capitals are either created or reproduced as we continue to do what we do as engineers. As we educate students, as we sort of frame the way in which they need to behave, engage, look for jobs, we continuously reinforce the field of engineering as it is. We generate reproduce certain kinds of capitals, reproduce certain kinds of behavior, and reinforce certain norms and rules. Now, it's no surprise to all of you. I think all of you would agree that engineering as a profession is value-laden and political. You know, there are certain sets of values that are central to how we think about engineering and how we train engineers, right? Efficiency, safety, profit, you know, all of these kinds of things are part and parcel of what it means to do engineering. And so what I really care about is thinking about different kinds of values that could be part of engineering. And what would that mean for how we organize engineering, like how we think about the field of engineering in a different kind of way. And the kind of issue that I've been thinking a lot about is this intersection between environment and social justice. For those of you unfamiliar with the idea of environmental justice, it sort of basically has to do with the ways in which human systems might interact or change or affect the environment, and the way in which environmental harms and benefits are distributed across populations. And so, you know, the kind of justice-related questions that come with air pollution are a very, very simple and good example of what environmental justice is about. So the point that I'm trying to make on this slide is that engineering plays a central, critical role in ideas of environmental justice. Infrastructural and technological systems, basically what engineers build and operate, and their byproducts are at the heart of these environmental justice challenges. And at least within the United States, these issues have a strong political valence now. Maybe you've heard of the Flint water crisis. You've heard about longstanding land pollution issues related to polychlorinated biphenyls. You know, you can kind of think about the way in which communities around industrial facilities are affected by air pollution, land pollution, and so on. Questions of justice are coming up in how we think about the future of energy, or even the way in which climate change is impacting communities that are being affected by sea level rise. So there's like urban or climate gentrification that is happening in the US. So point is simply that how we think about engineering means a lot for how we think about environmental justice, that we as engineers can be building infrastructure in ways that perpetuate injustice, or we could be building infrastructure in ways that mitigate or create more just futures. Given the time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basically there is a strong desire on the part of engineers and scientists, at least across the United States, who want to be doing other kinds of engineering work. From our research, we can kind of more concretely say that a lot of engineers are telling us that they didn't sign up for engineering to work on whatever it is that they're working on, that they want their engineering and scientific skills to be deployed for other purposes. And when I say engineers, I'm not only talking about students, I'm talking about everybody from students to retired professionals. One of the ways in which I've been thinking about our work or motivating ways in which I'm motivating the work is that most of the engineers in the world aren't in college. Most of the engineers in the world are in the working world. And so as we think about the future of engineering, or as I've been thinking about the future of engineering, I've also been thinking about how to affect the non-academic engineers, the folks who we generally within academia don't tend to have access to. So before I start wrapping up, I just want to mention a few premises that can help build an environmentally just field of engineering. The first is this idea that volunteerism and pro bono efforts that engage engineers and scientists doing community-oriented environmental justice work will only bite at the margins of the scale of the issues that exist in the United States, and I'm sure that exist in many parts of Europe as well. We need to figure out ways in which thinking differently about engineering actually becomes part and parcel of how engineers do their work, how it is valued, how it is economized, and how it sort of sustains itself financially. Because most people don't want to be entrepreneurs. If we are trying to get engineers to be different, there tends to be this idea that, you know, you need to sort of be a change entrepreneur, you need to maybe start your own kind of business or organization to do the kind of engineering that you want, but most people cannot take the risks of entrepreneurship. We can't solely focus on the way students are educated because, as I said, most of the engineers in the world aren't students. And also they might not have the kind of agency that they need to make the change that they feel like they need to. So we need to be thinking about engaging practicing engineers or senior engineers. Lastly, if we build it, they will come. Our research is showing a very, very strong desire to develop new ways of doing engineering. And if we can figure that out, engineers all across the age spectrum and experience spectrum are willing to do this kind of engineering work. So the work that we've been doing in my lab is across 3 different vectors, from students to retired professionals. Organizational context-wise, we're engaging with engineers all across academia, nonprofit, the private sector space, and government. And we're trying to sort of think about an environmentally just profession of engineering from philosophy all the way to practice. I'll just share a couple quick examples of things that we're doing. Project Confluence is our endeavor to mobilize more engineering and scientific talent to address longstanding environmental justice challenges in the US by forming community partnerships. And while we've been doing sort of more academic oriented works, focusing on how community collaborations change engineers' ability to formulate societally impactful research questions, the third bullet point is something that I want to emphasize, which is we are trying to develop a curriculum that can be deployed to practicing engineers on how to think about environmental justice in the work that they do in a firm, as opposed to, you know, students. And the idea there is to try to demonstrate how this kind of and different kind of engineering work can be valued in professional contexts such that they can generate revenue by making the case that thinking about environmental justice is part and parcel of how we do engineering, and they can sort of generate revenue from city governments or their clients to support that kind of environmental justice oriented work. We launched the Constellation Prize a couple years ago, which is basically an effort to recognize this alternative kind of engineering work. And one of the cool things there is that this symbolic capital generating approach has actually led to the creation of economic capital. So one of the winners from last year was able to use the Constellation Prize to develop business. So he focuses on geothermal energy. He said, hey, I won the Constellation Prize, and that actually led to business for him to promote geothermal energy. We are working with the US Department of Energy to shape their technology R&D portfolio to infuse principles of justice, such that the questions that motivate their funding opportunities, the prizes and challenges that they create, actually have set justice as a central principle in all of them. And so that's sort of an idea of structural change that can affect economic, social, and symbolic capital in this new kind of field that we're trying to conceive of. So before I end, this is just basically a hand sketch of what, you know, how we might start thinking about an environmentally just field of engineering. And so with the yellow boundary, I'm trying to sort of signify that, you know, there are certain things that engineers within an environmentally just field of engineering might not do because they identify with a different kind of engineering. So there are things that are inside the field of engineering and things that might be outside. And the point that I'm trying to make with these, you know, colored squiggles inside is that I would like to hope that in the future, all of these small dots that you see in the economic capital, like this little green dot, this little red dot here, the blue dot, this pink dot here, which sort of are meant to symbolize the work that we are doing in Reengineered, is just part of a larger endeavor that is focused on an environmentally just field of engineering. So how might we sort of think about the development of symbolic, cultural, economic, and intellectual capital in ways that what we're doing, at least in Reengineered, is just a very, very small sliver. So an environmentally just field of engineering needs to have a consistent set of principles and values that provide direction, needs to have a set of practices that align with these principles and values, has to have a community of like-minded and self-reflected practitioners, researchers, and educators, and importantly, needs to be economically and financially viable for it to thrive. Right now, basically what I'm hearing time and again from students to practicing engineers is that I have nobody to talk to about these issues in the work that I do, and I can't get paid to do this kind of justice-oriented engineering work. I have to relegate that to nights and weekends or pro bono activities. At least within the United States, there are some existing efforts that are sort of aligned or synergistic with what I'm talking about here, but there really is no accounting for what the sort of collective capital we are generating through our efforts actually is. So I'll end with a set of questions. What kind of intellectual capital needs to be developed to sort of undergird this environmentally just field of engineering? What does social capital look like? What kinds of projects need doing to build economic capital? And basically what I'm trying to ask there is, what kind of entrepreneurship can help us move beyond entrepreneurship? What are the measures of success? And basically, what's missing in this argument? Or am I crazy in proposing this? So with that, I will end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Darshan, for such a great opening, and you put to the table so many interesting themes on what it means to teach and prepare not only students, but the existing workforce towards this socially just and engaged practice. I want now to give the floor to those in the audience. If you have comments, if you want to share some examples from your own practice, or would like to know more about how you can integrate some examples in your own teaching practices, feel welcome to raise your hand. And in the meantime, I will just give the floor to Natalie to share her comment.
I thought you'd ask me to speak, and I wrote it because I can never quite eloquently say what I mean, so I wrote it down. But I guess, thank you so much. Like, it was really interesting, and I've been reading about field theory as well recently, and become really interested in that. So it was really nice to see. I guess loads of things interested me, but particularly on the last slide about like entrepreneurship. I do find there's a big push to like help students develop these skills at the moment, and I guess as well I feel this pressure when students come to me and ask me what their options are, because a lot of them don't see that they have options because of their values don't align with like industry and economic sort of things. And to me, the answer then is, well, maybe we should consider different business models, but then that's maybe not the best answer. And I feel really conflicted in how to help students with this. Like I recognize that they feel powerlessness, but I also don't know how to support that because I don't know the answers, and I guess we all don't really know the answers to a lot of these things.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, do you have a question? Is there something that you want me to respond to?
No, it was literally just a comment on like me.
Okay, yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. I completely agree. Okay. Anybody wants to maybe reflect on what Natalie said or add to it, or? One thing that I'll say is that, yeah, I feel like we are doing a better and better job within the education space training engineering students to think differently about their role and responsibility in the world and the kinds of values that ought to drive how they do engineering work. But the world that they then enter is not necessarily one that is accepting of those kinds of alternatives, right? And so that's why, again, the focus for me recently has sort of been thinking about, well, how do we change the outside world such that, it sort of provides a different set of opportunities for the students who are entering that world. And I'll be happy to sort of keep you posted, Natalie, on whether or not we're partially successful there.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't really have a proper question.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
I don't have a total answer to that, but I do think it's helpful to remind students that they won't always be entry-level engineers. Eventually they may not be able to do everything they want when they first graduate, but they may be able to do it later. And so I think one of the things that we try to do is to show them just some examples of what you might be able to do. I mean, my experience is most students don't even know what pro bono work means. And they don't necessarily think about the options that they might have. So we have one paper where we try to go through and we try to do this with them of, here's just a bunch of things you might think about. And one is maybe you just have to get the first job because you need to pay your student loans, and that's fine, right? But maybe you're thinking about developing a network where you can figure out where you might want to go next, or you are doing some pro bono work on the side, or you are finding ways in which you might be able to use the things you want to do later, and asking some of the questions. And that's where I start with them is, can you ask some of the questions? You may not be able to contribute to everything right at the way, but you're not always going to be at the point you are when you're graduating. They are convinced, even with no industrial experience, that no one in industry cares about these things. I don't know that that's totally true, but
it's
I think
true.
that
it's not
yeah.
True.
So trying to maybe bring in other people to try to talk about some of these things, I think is really important. I think they are convinced that it's not going to, they won't have, they're convinced they have less agency than I think they may actually have. But I think it is really difficult, and certainly something that we wrestle with too.
I think that the point that I try to make, at least to undergraduate students, is don't forget why you're an engineer, right? Write sort of a manifesto, because it's very easy to forget, right? Once you become comfortable as a practicing engineer, you get the money coming in, you maybe have a family and a mortgage and whatever, you might lose that thing. And so that's basically one thing that I try to have people do, is just don't forget.
I guess I'll be quiet now, but I guess one thing I worry about in that whole, I think that's a great idea, reminding students of where they might be. I guess my immediate thought to that is, I guess it's around inclusivity and diversity. It's we're telling students that we want different perspectives and different views, and then they then have to wait longer for their views to be heard. And to me, that's we're telling them, no, we don't want those views quite yet. You have to progress first, and before you can influence any change. And I wonder how many people we lose. But I think that's just, that is a reflection.
Yeah, I totally hear you, but I think that's reality, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
totally.
I've been around for a long time, and I think it's important for people to survive too. So it may not be popular, and I envy and admire the enthusiasm of the next generation, where they are sure they can change the world, and I hope they do. I didn't feel that I had that much power when I was a graduate student or a young professor, but I also think that, if you don't get tenure, at least in the US, you don't get to do a lot of influence. So maybe you have to do what you can to get into that position where you can make the larger influence. And I think everyone from marginalized communities knows that most of the time you're not listened to. And, it's a long process of trying to get to a place where someone will listen to you. I wish it were different. I wish we could change it all tomorrow, but I've been doing this for decades, and I don't anticipate it changing tomorrow, but I do hope that it will change.
Thank you.
I know Johanna.
Sorry.
Johanna had something to say.
Yeah, the more I say, the longer it takes and the less time I have on my own account. So I think I'm sort of trying to put my things in, but I see that Corinne has something. So I'm happy to share also something about entrepreneurship. I have a total different, I guess it matters where you are. And I think the US context is different to the EU context, or at least what I experienced in Eindhoven. I deliberately not teach about entrepreneurship, because I think that comes anyway later. And all my engineers, they all want to become entrepreneurs. So I just feed them theory and more sort of value things. But I mean, let's not. And I hear the other arguments there, but it's just interesting. I think. I think context matters here, but I have maybe more to tell later. I see Corinne, so sorry, I'm stopping.
Thank you, Johanna, for bringing this perspective to Europe, and also to Susan for showing the importance of taking small steps. And Corinne, I give now the floor to you.
Thank you,
Corinne
Johanna.
Shaw, I assume.
I'm not able to use my camera at the moment, but what I wanted to say is that many of what is presented really resonates with me, because but I think we're looking at it I'm from Cape Town in South Africa, and we run a course as part of our program called Engineering Business. We've got an Engineering Business course, but also an Engineering Society course. And what we find is that some engineers are not focused on social justice and on development. They actually just want to get into the workplace and earn money and focus on the more technical and engineering science aspects. You know, many of our students come into engineering because they're good at maths, and that's what they want to focus on. So we do, with a course that's part of our core program, this Engineering Society course, we find resistance from some students that we're trying to engage with social issues, economic issues, political, and so on, because they don't see that as part of what is valued in engineering and what's modeled by the other engineering academic staff. You know, so we find some pushback and resistance from students who are saying, you know, I'm not going to be this person where I want to change the world. I just want to find a good job.
Thank you, Corinne. Any response to Corinne?
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I've just sort of been approaching that by saying not everybody is going to buy this idea, and that's fine. People come into engineering for all kinds of reasons. But I do, in the end, want engineers to really understand that the decisions that they make matter. They have implications. And if you can just bear that in mind, that's it. That's the most I can expect. That is the yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, I resonate with what you said as well. I'm in a unique position where I now have a department of what we call integrated engineering. And now we're starting to develop enough of a reputation that students are coming to us because they know they're going to have the course in engineering and social justice. And so they are interested in these things. I have 4 students in my circuits-like class that have minors in sociology. And so when I did some of the things I'll talk about in a minute, I got these great comments from them. But a few years ago, when people didn't know what we were, they came over, we didn't necessarily have the same enthusiasm. And we teach a user-centered design class at the 2nd or 3rd semester. And there it's for all engineers, because we think this user-centered design mentality or mindset is really important in developing your practice as an engineer. But this is not what everyone expects. We also have the diversity, inclusion, social justice flag for our core curriculum of the university on this class. So students are engaging with issues of what is their own positionality, with their own privilege, and what is that of their users. And I have never gotten such horrible evaluations as the first time I taught this class to my face. And in the assignments, they said this was all very important and they should be talking about the social blah, blah, blah. But on the evaluations, they said it was a load of crap. And why are we doing this? And this is not engineering. So these 2nd semester students are telling me, I have a PhD, I've been doing this for decades, that I don't know what engineering is, and this is not it because it doesn't have numbers. So some students are not at all into this. Some students are very interested in this, and this is what motivates them. I'm at a Catholic school, and so some of them really have a sense of giving back to the community, and others really, that's not what they want to do. They just see engineering as a way to make a good living. Their teachers in high school told them they were good at math and science, and honestly, some of them have never thought beyond that. One of my big pushes is to try to have them just think deeply about why are you becoming an engineer? So you don't end up hating it down the road and be like, I never thought of doing anything else, but I hate what I do. So if we can get you to at least think a little bit, but certainly not all engineers want to do this kind of work. And like Darshan said, maybe they don't all have to. It's just, could you at least be be an aware engineer. So if you're working at a company and it has other whatever implications, don't say there's no political implications to what you're doing. Just say that you can live with them. Like if I can at least get you to that point, I feel like I'm, because I can't turn everyone into me, right? But I don't want you to say that, you know, I'm working for this defense company and there is no political implications of what I do, because that's not true. And that's how we get to the big, you know, barriers between people and stuff. But it is challenging, and some days I just don't feel like doing it. Other days I feel like, yeah, we need to keep going, and other days I feel like we need to, you know, really help those who are on this journey with us, and let's help them to be able to go farther. And we won't worry about those other ones who don't. But it is a pleasure when you start getting people in the class who want to do this, right? Like, why can't we do more of this? So I'll share a few comments from students when I do my presentation.
Thank you.
There's a book that could be helpful that's called Solving Problems That Matter and Getting Paid for It. It's by Kunjan Mehta. So for those of you who might be struggling with examples for your students, this could help.
Please, if you can put a link in the chat, and I also know that you have to leave soon, so I want to thank you, Darshan, now for your insightful presentation. And
thank you.
This also allows us in a way to restructure a bit our time. So we have 80 minutes left, and I propose that each speaker will have 40 minutes. That includes the presentation and the discussion, rather than gathering at the end with Johanna and Susan, if that is also okay with you. Susan, I'm very glad now to give the floor to you and to continue with some of the rich comments that you already made.
Okay, can you see my screen?
I confirm, yes.
Okay. All right, so some of this will build on. I thank you, Darshan, for a great intro. I don't know that I'm as creative as he is, but I want to show you some examples of things that you could do in your curriculum that I think try to get towards getting students to see the larger implications of some of what they're doing. And again, I am at this new department called Integrated Engineering, which, having come out of electrical engineering, has been a pleasure. I'm at the University of San Diego, which is a small private Catholic school in San Diego, California. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how do we frame engineering, which I think resonates with some of what Darshan was talking about, and then give you two examples of curricula, the final straw and conflict minerals. So the first thing is, I think we often start with and don't even recognize the idea that engineering is objective, right? How many of you believe that engineering is objective? Thinking in this group, I'm probably not going to get a lot of takers on that one, but you know, most of our students and many of our colleagues really have this positivist view, not that they would use the word positivist because I don't think that that is familiar, but have this idea that engineering really is objective. But is it? So is it the same if I do it in San Diego and Corinne does it in South Africa? Right? I mean, the reality is no, but most people are there. So if we can move to a mindset where we're thinking engineering is done by, for, and with people, then who is doing it does matter, and the projects that we work on do matter. And so for me to move to a change-making engineer or to a different way of framing engineering means we really have to move away from this idea that engineering is purely objective and it doesn't matter where we are or who we are. Because I think that as we support this idea that engineering is purely objective and thus there is the technical, and really the way my experience of engineering is usually there's the technical that's at the top and kind of everything else is lower. So when we talk about the social technical dualism, I don't see it as there's two separate things this way. I see it very hierarchical, that the technical is on the top and the social is lower. And I think we need to try to fight against that, because I think when we do reinforce that dualism and that hierarchy, we also reinforce the other hierarchies that we don't really necessarily want to support in engineering, that are tied to race, that are tied to gender, and multiple forms of diversity. I think part of the social technical dualism is our way of seeing this idea that something always has to be better. So many of you may be familiar with Linda Van Asupa and Liz Schlemmer, who had a really influential paper, I think, that talked about engineering as a space that's not diverse, because that's how it was defined. Right? Diversity does not necessarily lead to better efficiency or some of the other values that we have in the industrialized society, engineering, with this factory model that we have. But so we say that we want more diversity, but then the way that engineering is designed and actually is supposed to work actually goes against that. So if we need to do something to break this socio-technical divide, if we want to reimagine engineering, which partly for me is a motivation of to try to make it more welcoming. I felt as a woman in engineering that I wasn't that welcome, and I want to have others not feel the way that I did. And it's not just a gender issue. There's also a racial issue and many other issues, particularly in the United States. So if we think about who is engineering for and how do we talk about it? When we talk about engineering, do we show just the pictures on the left that show things with no people in them that are very tangible and technical? Or do we show the people that are involved in the things that we do so that our students can see that what they do impacts people? How is it that we portray engineering? So in our department, we've been trying to work on a number of things where we focus on socio-technical thinking, and this is how we're thinking about it, as the ability to identify and address issues with the understanding of the complex ways in which the social and technical are intertwined. Certainly environmental also fits into this, and as well as political and legal. So you'll see some interaction with some of these here. So at least my thinking these days is that we need to consider both what we teach and how we teach. So what we teach involves some of the content pieces, and I'm going to show you some of that. How we teach, I think, also involves some of how do we present ourselves, how do we engage with our students, and in ways that maybe don't try to reinforce that hierarchy. So this is how I introduce myself to my students, particularly when we're on Zoom or in a digital, in electronic conference online situation here. As it is now, I have nobody with their video on, so it seems very lonely, and it's really easy for people not to feel like they're with other humans. I think it's really essential when we're online for us to show that we are other humans, not just a box on the screen. I do this when I'm in person too, but I think it's particularly important online. So I won't give you all the pieces of it, but I feel like it's important for me to introduce myself in terms of both my background. As a woman, sometimes people don't assume I have a doctorate, so I need to make sure I put that one in there. I want them to see some of the interdisciplinary work that I had done and how that attracted me to engineering, what my research is. I want them to see my family. I have 2 daughters who are now, the older picture is more what they look like now, but some other highlights. My husband is an engineer, and so I can talk about that as well. And that helps them to see some other dimensions of me. If we were in my class, I'd also show a picture of my cats and all these other things so they can see me as a human. So when we first started doing some of this work as part of a National Science Foundation grant for revolutionizing engineering departments, or RED, what we decided was, rather than having a whole bunch of new classes, which is difficult to do, although I did get the privilege of getting to develop a whole new department where we could just start to develop new classes. But some of the classes, what we thought is, could we have some modules, like a 1 class period, 2 class period, 3 class period thing, where we try to introduce some of this content in a way that fits in with the rest of the class. So I just want to highlight a few things that I've learned through doing these modules that are helpful, I think, in trying to think about how others might be able to do it as well. So one is that it's really helpful if you can identify collaborators. We were fortunate as part of our RED grant to be able to hire some postdocs, and those postdocs came from diverse backgrounds. So I had a postdoc from anthropology, another postdoc from sociology, bioengineering. And so the ability to work with people outside your own discipline, I think, really is helpful, particularly if you're trying to bring in other topics where, I am not an expert in some of the other things that I wanted to bring in. I think it's really important that you find a course topic that you're already doing in the course that you could tie to something broader. If you come in with something that seems completely unrelated to what you're doing, the students will resist that, because the last thing they want is extra work. I think it's also important in terms of good teaching to make sure there's a course learning objective that this fits with. Now, you might have to make a new course learning objective or adapt one if you can't find one that fits. But the learning objectives to me are the most important part of what you're doing in the course, and so it's important that this fits in with this. I think it's important to make sure they're learning objectives for this module so that you can use those to make it clear what you actually want the students to be able to know and do after they've done it. Important to have activities for preparation before they come in, for something they do in class and for afterwards. And the part I didn't know at the beginning, even though I've been doing this for a long time, teaching and all, is that if you don't put some of this material on exams, have it in your assessments. So it's important to both assess the module to see how it's going so you can improve it, but also to make sure it shows up on exams. Many of you are maybe familiar with the, is this going to be on the test kind of question? And if you answer no, then that immediately says this wasn't so important. So it is important for you to think about, how could I incorporate this onto an exam? The other is to make sure that the social and technical content fit together so that they see engineering as a socio-technical endeavor rather than we just took a total break from what we were doing. I have my students work in homework teams for a number of different reasons. And so I felt it was important that I integrate this into their weekly homework so they didn't see this as something completely extra that they were being added onto. So sometimes there's technical calculations with it, sometimes presentations or discussion, but it fits in with their weekly homework. And I think as we do some of this, it's really important to think about how far you're going to take them and how you're going to take them. And some of this, as we know with all learning, right, people learn by coming from where they are to another step forward, right? And so different students are going to be at different places in this. But sometimes as you start talking about this, it can be really easy to feel just overwhelmed by the complexity or overwhelmed by feelings of guilt because some of the things that you end up talking about are really awful. So how do you balance it so that you leave students interested and perhaps struggling a bit with how to put things together, but not feeling like they're just overwhelmed? And then if you can help connect students to things that they have in their everyday lives, I think that also really helps. So the examples I'm going to show you here have to do with both consumer electronics and users of straws. And I think all of my students use consumer electronics and have used straws at some point in their life. My colleague Diana Chen has also done some stuff with voting with gerrymandering. So the first module I want to talk briefly about is the final straw. And I did this with Dr. Laura Gellis when she was a postdoc with us. This is for third-year students, and really had students wrestle with the idea of environmentalism versus accessibility. They considered the material properties of multiple straw materials. They engaged with case studies featuring users with a disability. And this was one homework assignment plus a homework problem, a class period, and a problem on the midterm. Most people, when they think about straws, and there have been lots of bans about plastic straws and things, think of things like the poor turtle with the straw stuck in his nose and how harmful this is when these plastic straws end up in the ocean. What people don't think about necessarily is where the idea of plastic straws came from and what these plastic straws mean to the disability community, where it's not a matter of convenience, but it could be a matter of survival. So the goal here, it fits very well with larger things I'm already trying to do in the materials course, which is when you have a materials design problem, you choose among your options and you justify that choice. So I have examples of a whole bunch of different kinds of straws that they can work with. And then the module itself focuses on what kind of alternative straw materials would you use for a specific user, depending on their particular needs. So we have students go through multiple kinds of straws: metal, bamboo, glass, silicone, acrylic, paper, pasta, single use. I have examples of some of these so they can see what they look like. And then we think about what would be, if you were using it as a straw, which things like being a choking hazard or an injury risk or costly, allows us to think about different criteria than we might normally think about when we're thinking about materials design, if we're just thinking about, say, designing a metal part or something. And then what we did was to give them examples, a little longer than what's on here, but some brief examples of folks from the disability community and the particular challenges they would have with the straw. And so then as they tried to put together, well, so for this particular individual, which straw material would work for them? And for example, if you are not able to position your head, then having a straw that only has one position is really not useful. You need something that can actually move. If you have are not able to control your biting mechanism, then having a straw that's really hard or glass or metal might be very harmful because it could break for you or cause problems yourself. So students often start this out thinking they know exactly where we're going with this, which I also like. They think we're going towards environmental, straws are terrible and we just should never use them. And then by the end, they realize, oh, you need to think about the users and maybe ask some of the users what they need rather than doing things like a complete ban. So we then in the midterm, as just an example of what a question might look like, they're asked to look at this data, which is from a disability organizing network, about different kinds of straws. The axes on the bottom here are different materials of straws, and then blue is recommend, red is don't recommend. And then we have the students think about why is there, some of these straws like number D in the middle there's a whole bunch of people recommending it and a whole bunch not. And my hope is that what they're getting to is saying it depends on the disability that you have, whether that particular straw material would work for you or not. And then we have them think about, what why there's such a difference and which straw they would recommend overall as we try to keep it to account all these different users with their different needs. I have a little video that we show from some advocates from the disability community about the importance of just, could someone ask us whether we need them or not? Some places have banned all the straws, and they say, oh, they're available on request, but they're not really available on request. So it's not that simple to just ban them. Maybe that helps for some of the environmental issues, but we haven't necessarily thought about all the human or social issues there. The other module I want to describe is what I did in my circuits class with conflict minerals. So this is for second year students, over 2 class periods, 1 homework assignment plus another homework problem and a problem in the midterm. And here I connected the capacitors that we talk about. I'd usually just talk about, how the current and voltage are related in them or the equations to describe them. If we're lucky, we have a lab and they actually see the physical capacitor, but then I wanted to go farther and think about where does these come from? Like, what's the material and who's involved in actually making the materials and things. And then we had them investigate the conflict mineral strategies of companies. I was fortunate for this to work with 2 postdocs, Bree Przelski, whose degree is in bioengineering, and Beth Reddy, whose degree is in anthropology, which is particularly useful to us in here. So this was, I have in my class now that I've adapted from circuits, I have a particular learning objective that talks about how can some examples of how circuits relate to your lives. I did put this into my circuits class when I taught it because often circuits seem so abstract and people have no idea why they're doing it, although all of us use things related to electrical engineering all the time, but it really does get lost in the shuffle. And then for this particular module to think about what are some options for engineers who are concerned with the use of conflict minerals. So for those of you who might not know what conflict minerals are, they're minerals that are mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and surrounding areas where the income from that mining is used to finance armed conflict. Commonly known as the 3 TGs, or tungsten, tin, tantalum, and gold. Tantalum is used in a lot of capacitors, which are used in consumer electronics, so that's the one that I focused on. One of the things that's nice with this is that if you look at where the DRC is, which is just about in the center of Africa, and you look at where Wakanda from Black Panther, how many of you have seen Black Panther? Is that an American thing? I can't tell if anyone is even out there. So Black Panther is a movie that's been very popular in the US, and it focuses on the fictional country of Wakanda, which happens to be right about in the same exact area as the DRC. And they have this tremendous mineral wealth, and it benefits them. So we have a conversation about the difference between the real DRC and how the folks there do not benefit from the mineral wealth that they have. It's extracted by others, and Black Panther, where they have tremendous mineral wealth and they hide it because they think that they will not be able to use it if they share it with the world. And if you haven't seen Black Panther and you are an engineering professor, I think it's an excellent example of futuristic engineering. And I love the woman in the front there is the sister of the main character, and she is an engineer and she's awesome. And so this means I get to talk about Black Panther in my class, which is awesome. It often gets me some students who maybe weren't the most contributing the most or eager to talk, who are suddenly eager to tell me all about this. And it is a nice comparison there. So I have them for their homework. I just asked them to give them some information so they could calculate how much tantalum is used globally in capacitors. And then where's tantalum mined? And I had them stop there. And then when they come into class, we talk about, okay, where is it mined? Do you know anything about it? And then we talked about the DRC and the conflicts. So they had some appreciation of the complexity of that issue. And then we have them brainstorm about, well, how could we minimize the use of conflict minerals? And they usually come up with things like recycling or reuse or optimizing designs or finding alternative materials. And then for the second homework, I asked them, then they each assigned to a specific company, common ones that they've heard of, and they're supposed to research the strategies of that particular company for tracing their conflict minerals. In the United States, part of our Dodd-Frank Act says you have to trace your supply chain of conflict minerals. That doesn't mean it's always done very well, and this gives students an opportunity to look at the actual things that are on these companies' websites, which are often very hard to sort through, but I think it also gives them a real insight into what kind of reports do engineers maybe write in the future, and what kind of information do they use. And so then students come in a week later and they do a presentation on the company that they had. Some of my favorite moments were day one when we started out and we said, okay, so what do you know about the DRC? And one of the students said, well, I saw a link that said something about conflict, but I didn't click on that. And I think that's, very common. And actually that was fine because I didn't want them reading about the conflict in the DRC at 2 o'clock in the morning when they might be doing my homework. I wanted them to be in a place where we could talk about it and give it some context. But unless we ask students to go that extra mile, they're not going to do it. So when I first started this module, my anthropology colleague was like, well, I'm sure all these students know about conflict minerals. I said, well, let's just see. And I will say I've had very, very few who've heard about it. Now, some of the high schools talk about blood diamonds. That's the closest I've gotten. But this is not necessarily something that engineering students are exposed to or are familiar with in my experience. When we did the presentations on day 2, I thought we would just do the presentations and move on. But the students the first year were very insistent that we had to vote. We needed to say who had the best strategy because the strategies are different. And not everybody wanted to vote for their own company. So I thought that was really interesting. And then this relates, I think, to what we were talking about before is one of my students said, well, I think if I were working, I would pick a capacitor that wasn't made from a conflict mineral, but I wouldn't tell my boss. I said, well, that's interesting. Why wouldn't you tell your boss? I said, well, I don't think that they would, value that. I said, oh, okay, well, I think that's interesting. And I do think if you walked up and you just said, I picked this material because it's conflict free, they might be like, okay. But I think if you went to your boss and you said, here's all the reasons, all the criteria why I picked this particular capacitor over another one, and a particularly compelling piece, here's its technical specifications, its cost, its size, whatever, and it's also conflict free. And I think that that's good. I think they'd be impressed at the thoughtfulness and the care in which you took to make your decision. So I think sometimes students are assuming things, and perhaps we can help to teach them that they don't have to hide it all under a bush. Here's just a couple comments from students about their reaction to some of this. So some of it's cool to get away from the stigma of engineers only caring about math and science and show the larger impact. Sparked my issues and things like this. Some students think that it should be a larger part of their classes. I'll go, this is not everyone. And I did like this last comment of how could I be 20 years old and never heard of this? How could this be? That's interesting. I do think also that it's very interesting to see that students struggle with the definition of engineering. We did focus groups at the end of it. Some of them were like, well, we did stuff that wasn't engineering. It's like, well, I guess it was engineering, but it was really different, looking at it from a different angle. So I think as we show them examples of this, it is important that we help to show that this is engineering too. Because some of the other comments I got from students, well, this was real world engineering because they see it having applications in the real world. One student also unsolicited reached out to one of the instructors and said, I think this was phenomenal. You were asking how we could do this change-making thing. I think this was a really good way to do it. Great connection of what we're doing to real world problems. And it didn't have the feel guilty vibe that sometimes gets associated with this. Plus everyone likes a day off of repetitive circuits problems. So I don't disagree with that. I had a lot of mechanical engineers in my class, in the circuits class. And I honestly feel like maybe some of this was the most impactful of all the stuff that I worked on with them. So I feel like as we move into trying to really help students see engineering as socio-technical, I do think you can't help but do the ethics as you do this. I think it comes along with it. And that I think prepares them better for tackling challenging problems. I think seeing the messiness of what this is really important. It's not, if we make all of our homework problems fit in nice little boxes and not have any connection to anything else, and when they get in the real world, they're not really prepared for the complexity of what they'll see. And so we've been able to start doing this in some classes. We've done it in a couple other things too, but I just wanted to share those two with you. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Susan, for your presentation, which you really brought so clearly these examples of what we could do more as teachers to integrate social and ethical aspects alongside technical aspects. And I want now to give the floor to our audience for any comments or questions. So Natalie, again, I put the spotlight on you as you made two comments. One about using Black Panther in your teaching, and even, let's say, selfishly, I would also be interested to hear out more about how you use this film into your classroom, but also about what you point out regarding the definition of engineering and how to convey to students potentially an understanding of engineering as a socio-technical endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, this was a great presentation for me because materials is my area, so it was nice. I think I've used Black Panther in a slightly different way, but I think a worse way in some ways, because maybe the student reception to how I used it was not as good. Because I used it in more of a way of like showing about how like social injustices in terms of how we exploit different countries for minerals to serve sort of purposes in more developed countries, and how we're engineering for considering who we engineer for and things like that. And there's quite a lot of resistance to that sort of idea, I guess. So it didn't work as well, but it's more like something that I'm learning of how to deal with the student resistance of like just framing my teaching in a slightly different way. And with respect to the definition of engineering, I mean, I really do think that the definition of engineering is becoming less and less clear to me as I go through my career as an academic. I'm definitely no closer to being able to define what it is. Definitely further away, and I think I really struggle with identity issues because of it. I think a lot of my identity issues are down to that sort of lack of being able to place my finger quite on what it is. So I do struggle with that, and I don't know. I feel like a lot of the people who are very comfortable with the definition, I don't necessarily think that is the definition. So I don't know. But anyway, they were my thoughts. It was a lovely talk. It's really good to see such solid examples that I feel like I can do something with and take away. I always appreciate that in a talk. Thank you.
Thanks. And I have written up some stuff on this. I'm happy to share stuff on either of those modules as well. I do think the definition of engineering is perhaps slipperier than we make it appear. And I consider it a big plus that students are struggling with that, right? Because I want to reframe what engineering is. I don't really care for the definition that I think is what the sort of standard definition. And I don't think it works for everything. And it doesn't work for me either. I feel like it doesn't fit with who I am and how I want to be an engineer in the world. I was very struck when they did work at the University of Oklahoma years ago with industrial engineering, and they had more women than men for a while in the class. When they interviewed students, one of the students says, I like industrial engineering because I can do engineering without having to be an engineer. And that has always struck with me because I feel like sometimes the actual work, like I'm really interested. I love describing how the diode works and all this stuff, right? But then some of the other cultural pieces, particularly as an electrical engineer, like I don't want to be like that. I am not interested in that culture, right? So can we disentangle, or can we take new ownership of the actual engineering part? Can we reframe that so more of us can be engineers and still be comfortable in our own skin? So I like having them struggle with that. We do another thing that you might think of too, if you're interested in going down that line, is one of my colleagues, Alex Mejia, in his engineering and social justice class, and we've done this in some workshops we've done, has a whole bunch of these pictures that come out of some leadership academy thing. And like some of them are like pictures of bridges, and some of them are pictures from hospitals, and some of them are pictures of people gathering around something. And you say, which of these pictures seems like engineering to you, and then why? And just seeing the different ways in which students or faculty or whoever it is respond to this is really interesting. And do they pick ones that have people in them, or do they not pick ones that have people in them? Do they have a very sense of, the very specific, tangible, technical things, or do they see it as broader? And you get a huge variety even amongst students and stuff. So I think it's fascinating to see that. And it helps students to realize, oh, this definition is not as easy as I thought, because I thought it was clear to me, but then wow, my colleague has a whole different way of thinking about this. And maybe they have a point. And again, I think if we could accept different things and say that's okay, that gets at this socio-technical dualism again for me. It's not like one thing is right and the other is wrong, but they can both exist, and they're both part of what's the definition of engineering. And then maybe more people can be welcomed in if we don't have to all be exactly the same.
I think another key part of that is the context again, and like the perception in schools. So like certainly in the UK, we're very specialist with our subjects, and that really doesn't leave space for a different interpretation of engineering as far as I can make out. So I think that's a massive part of it.
Yeah, it certainly is contextual. Like that whole myth that it is completely objective and that when I do it, it's, it doesn't matter what other folks are doing, right? I think honestly, that's part of a colonial mindset of this idea that we have to have everything be the same and that place doesn't matter. And the little work I've done with trying to look at Indigenous things, like that idea of place matters and who I am doing this thing matters. That's tough though, because it means that the individual needs to do a lot of work to figure out how they're going to present these things and be comfortable with their own issues of privilege and stuff, which is harder than say, please use my example, but it is important. Like if you can't do this and be comfortable with some of the discussions, then it doesn't necessarily move us forward in the ways we're hoping.
Thank you for these points. And if there are other questions, please raise your hand. I'm also dying to ask a question, but I'll first wait. I will just formulate my question in the meantime. And your program and you and your colleagues' work, you mentioned also Diana Jen, has been doing such a great job in sending to students this message that engineering is a broader discipline than they might believe when they start in their first year. And I want to ask you more about how you feel that students' perception changes through time. Do you see the benefit of having such a program as the program you are involved in?
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of progress lately. When we first started, we had embedded software as a concentration, or you could design your own major. So the first students that came over to us, we called ourselves general engineering. We switched to integrated because general sort of sounded like we were bumbling around trying to figure out what we were doing. And integrated is more, we're trying to integrate different kinds of engineering, or engineering with other disciplines, and engineering with what you want to do with your life. So we have a better story about it. Those first students who came in doing embedded software were not so into this whole social justice thing. And when they had to take the social justice class, which I was really insistent that although we try to embed social justice throughout a lot of what we do, we need to have a class that focuses on that, or else it's going to get lost in the shuffle. And let's just say it didn't go tremendously well for some of those students, but other ones really were like, oh, this is really interesting. And I need to think some more about this. And so I actually feel like those embedded software students now, like, they offer a unique perspective. They tend to be more white men than the other folks we have, but they bring a certain perspective, and perhaps it is really important that we talk with them as well, that they see some of these issues and they think about some of the things, like even as simple as how do you design when we give our permission to give our data, like I do another project on Fitbits, like the Apple Watches and stuff. And you'd be amazed at how much data people get from that. And the permission thing we give, which is 84 pages of things you scroll through to say, okay. Like I think my embedded software students need to think about, should I do something different with that so people realize what they're giving? Like, is there ways they can do that? That's really interesting. We now have a sustainability concentration and a biomedical concentration. The sustainability folks in particular are coming in. There's more women in both of those than there are in the embedded software. And they're coming in thinking more like, I want to change the world. And so some of those students are coming in. Those are my sociology minors and things. And it's very different. I mean, it's great, right? I had my materials class last semester, I had 9 students. I had 7 women. I've been teaching for 30 years. I've never had that before. It was awesome. Right now I have 9 women and 6 men in the class that I have. That's my alternative to circuits, which is a broader introduction to electrical engineering. And when you have students who are coming in wanting this kind of thing, I mean, it's awesome. They like come in the next day and they're like, can we do more of that? And I think it's really important. And how do I figure out how to integrate this with my life and stuff, which is very different than some of the others. I feel like, the comments that I gave you there were all students who they were not in my major yet because I didn't have the major yet. So it was electrical engineers and mechanical engineers. And I feel like there are ways in which we can help those students to at least open their minds a little bit and see some of it. I will say even faculty have struggles with this. I think sometimes when you say you want to bring some social responsibility and people are like, what does that mean? One of my colleagues like, so you're going to just give social science credit? Like, what do you think I'm going to do? Read a poem? I mean, it's not like I'm unconnected. I had this person when I went to the American Society for Engineering Education, and I gave a talk very similar to the conflict minerals piece, and I called it Integrating Social Responsibility in Circuits. This white man came up to me and he said, that is the best talk I've ever heard at a conference. You really made me think. I'm like, this is great. He goes, but from the title, I didn't want to come. I thought it was going to be terrible. So I think it's an interesting, like, why would you say that to me? And then these 2 other white men chimed right in and said, yeah, I agree. I'm like, okay. So I felt like a revolutionary. That's the one time I felt like a revolutionary. I think it was totally honest. And I don't know what they thought I was going to present. I don't know if they were relieved when it sounded like I had a clue what circuits was and I wasn't just throwing everything out the window or something, but like, what is going on there that they thought social responsibility was going to be such a terrible topic or whatever. So I think it's interesting sociologically in some of the resistance that you get. So it's a pleasure when you get the ones who are more open to this and really are willing to engage more. This is the first time this semester when I said, what do you know about the DRC? And the student gave me this whole big thing. It's in Central Africa and they speak French and it used to be Zaire, blah, blah, blah. I found out later his family is from the DRC. So, and he comes to my office later. He's like, yeah, my cousin and I have been thinking about this and I really need to do something to address this issue and we're going to be working on it. So there's all sorts of different things. That's very different than the people I got the first time who were like, I don't even know what that is. I did have a group who got up and talked about the DCR. So you can say they're so disconnected, they don't even know the acronym, but you meet them where they are. So it is a pleasure as you start to get some who really are interested in this. And we've also been attracting, I think, students from a more diverse set of backgrounds, some of whom really do appreciate seeing some of this work and seeing that maybe it connects to their lives in ways that they hadn't thought before. Everybody uses electronics, so it does help people to think about, do I really need that new iPhone? Like, I know it has better cameras or whatever, but do I need the new one every year? And honestly, if I can get them just thinking about that, I think that's a real plus.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And I would love to find out more, but now we are approaching the time for our third speaker today, Johanna Höffken from TU Eindhoven. And I think this talk, I imagined it to be last, as I felt that it would pick up on themes from both speakers, as I know that Darshan has also focused on entrepreneurship that might be also close to Johanna, in addition to the concern with social problems across the world. So Johanna, I'm happy to have you as a speaker.
Great, super. Thanks a lot. And well, I'm really inspired. Thanks also, Susan, for your presentation. And I hope I sort of continue on sort of sharing ideas of what we can do and about engineers for social change, which is the title really of this webinar. What is important, I think, and what is a little different to, I think, Susan and also Darshan, is that I'm a social scientist working at the TU Eindhoven, and I'm this animal where people say, oh, this social, anything but social comes then to me. And I'm going to talk about a course I designed, which is called Responsible Innovation for the World. I like sweeping titles, and this is one of those. And I start right away with explaining you about the course, and then I go back a little bit, go a bit more theoretical, in order to then give you some really examples of what I do there, and hopefully it inspires you in one or the other way. So this course is actually but what I start with is sort of a pitch, where I'll just tell you, okay, so if I had to pitch the course, what is it really about? Now, in Responsible Innovation for the World, I tell the students, you will contribute to responsible innovations for the world. You will work on real life projects. And you will be supervised by entrepreneurs and innovators from the private, public, and non-for-profit sector. And you will work a long time on that. You will work 3 quarters, that's about 7 months here at Eindhoven. And you will work in multidisciplinary teams together on your responsible innovation project. A bit more, I don't know, technical maybe. So it's a bachelor course, and it is an elective. So not everyone has to do it. So it's open to all bachelor programs. And as I said, it's about 7 months. There are about 32 students being able to join. It's application based. And I designed it in 2018, and this course has been really awarded highly at both university level, but also nationally. And what you can see here is the course till now has sort of brought about 4 generations for social change, I've called it when I made the presentations. And suddenly I realized social change, what does that actually mean? What am I actually supposed to talk about here? Engineer for social change. And if you really sort of dive into literature, which I don't go too much here, I can't do that, it's also not my sort of core expertise, but I mean, you can see that social change is something which is sort of inevitable. It's unavoidable. Yeah, it's basically simply a process of continuity in change. And you know, very abstractly, you could say it's a new thing that has taken over from an old one. So of course, sociology has really asked about social change, you know, has asked many questions, and they include these things that actually explain social change. Yeah, and then we go into issues like evolutionary theories, functional theories, conflict theory, what characterizes social change, and we see already some characterizations up there. It's inevitable, it's unavoidable, it's ubiquitous, it's contagious. When something happens in one society, it, you know, might also inspire another one. It's multi-leveled, etc. You know, the pace is different. But one of the things which, you know, one of the questions which I find, of course, especially interesting is, you know, what triggers social change? What is that? And also there are many answers. You know, there are these macro factors going on, and it's about conflict, about demography, environment. And often you see that, you know, sort of social movements are the ones which bring around social change. Feminist movement, civil rights movement, LGBTQ plus movement. And I thought, well, and what about education? Education for social change, which is also the topic of this this talk or this seminar even today. And of course, you know, the role of education for social change is, you know, contentious, is contested. So some say, you know, with education you can actually create new values, but others say actually you can only amplify some tendencies which are already there. But I think what is important here to know, and just to share again, that of course, in any case, we can direct social change. Yeah, whether it's through creating new or amplifying, we can direct social change. And with that, of course, now someone comes on the plate and on the agenda again, who is probably not new for many of you, John Dewey, which is written wrongly here, I'm sorry. And he says, so if we direct this social change, yeah, what's our frame of reference? How do we actually do that? And he really sort of proposed this democratic ideal, yeah, as a frame of reference. Yeah, and he says, like literally here, so the problem of education in its relation to direction of social change is all one with the problem of finding out what democracy means in its total range of concrete application. Quite a mouthful, but I think the main point I want to make here is this idea really sort of, hey, and that's this next point, which doesn't come out here. The point here even is it's a moving answer and action. We have to look for it again and again and again in that democratic ideal when we go for social change. Obviously, we have to understand that John Dewey wrote that in 1937, and just imagine the context in 1937 and what was important, you know, when you think about education in times of Nazism, how do you say that? You know, national socialistic movements in Germany, for example. So, point I want to take here is this idea of, you know, this democratic ideal, which gives the reference for our search of steering, directing social change, and it's a moving answer and action. It is not static. And I think that really brought me further to this idea, and we've heard that already, social technical aspect. We talked about social technical aspects, you know, this idea of, yeah, social and technical as interwoven, you can't even sort of split it, etc. There is no pure objective science. And in that sense, also education is political. And that is something what Ira Shore says, and maybe you know him, but he says, like, a curriculum that does not challenge the standard syllabus and conditions in society informs students that knowledge and the world are fixed and fine the way they are, with no role for students to play in transforming them and no need for change. So this is Ira Shore here. To put it a bit more maybe pointedly or a bit more crass, we can look at Freire, who says all forms of education are political. Education that tries to be neutral only supports the dominant ideology in society. Obviously, this is really idealistic here, but I think this is inspiring, at least it inspires me, and inspired me in my work on responsible innovation for the world. What I thought is, or what I found interesting, is that it wasn't social change which actually sort of, got me thinking, but it was rather this idea of impact. I had this sort of, very direct question, maybe even naive question. So how can I make the world a better place? Yeah, and I thought, okay, so my impact, how I can try to do that, as I can do that through education. And Ira Shore's course is Empowering Education. He also wrote this book about it there. And I then designed that course, which I talked about just earlier in the beginning of this presentation. Again, this is a longer quote here. We don't need that so much, but I think what you want to take from that, or what I take from that here, is that you actually have to sort of combine that, that pedagogy is actually, is to relate personal growth, personal, maybe even self-fulfillment to our public life, to what is out there. So we want to develop strong skills, academic knowledge, habits of inquiry, critical curiosity about society, power, inequality, and change. So how did I all do this? And one of the guiding principles, or even concepts, which really led me in the design, and also, when I actually gave the course, because many of you know, once you give a course, it's actually not over, because you keep on working on it. And one of the notions I coined here is what I call reflection. And it actually is, of course, you can see it already, is, it brings two verbs of two ideas together, the idea of reflecting and the idea of acting. And it's really about educating and empowering both critical, reflective thinkers and active citizens, doing something in the world out there. And as I said, so responsible and innovation are these sort of the two more concrete or related notions with which I work. So responsible is really about our ability to respond and to hear and formulate responses to questions or things out there. And innovation, you can see as sort of is as a potent form to induce and manifest change. Yeah, and I think you already see where I want to go there, because our ability to respond and to reflect is about reflection, and innovation and manifesting change is really a bit more about action. And this is how I sort of came together with this idea, or this guiding principle of reflection, which I use as a concept in my teaching, without teaching too much about reflection, but actually doing that in practice. And I would like to give you some examples on this now. So one of the things I see is that the engineers I teach, they often, they get a problem and then they find solutions right away. What I find important, so when we work, in that course, is that I said, first you have to actually understand the problem in context, which basically means is that you have to understand different voices, different ways of, understanding what's the issue. It relates to what Susan just talked about, the straws. Yeah, for some straws are really sort of absolutely important, even for their survival, for their well-being, and for others they're absolutely not important, or even dangerous for animals, for example. So understanding the problem in context. And what I do here is, so students work on these projects, and first, before going into action, they actually have to reflect and talk, and I call that the context dossier. So this is a certain way of how they have to do research about that. The second point, another example of how I, sort of teach, hopefully, engineers for social change, is that I work with this idea of pluriverse, and pluriverse has been is actually a book, a post-development dictionary book. It's publicly available, so I can also put it in the chat. And what it does, it actually offers very alternative notions about how to think about the world. So there are different, like, and sometimes they're very abstract, sometimes they're very concrete. It's about sustainable development. Here we have some examples here. It's about cooperative ecosystems, about underdeveloping the North. Here we have an Instagram post about these presentations by students. So what I do here is that I actually let them read one of those chapters. They're quite short, which is good, only 2 pages, and then they have to present it. And then in that case, we actually also posted that on our Instagram channels with our course. And I find that extremely important because they are actually exposed to concepts which they've never heard about before. And they're different ones, not the sort of, conventional ones we've often heard. Another way of how I actually try to stimulate critical thinking is that I actually do lectures which are criticizing the established, what I call here. And a good example really are the sustainable development goals, as often we see that in education, they're quite easy to apply, they're quite easy maybe even to teach. And what I give them is that, okay, of course we have these goals, but I mean, are they really promoting sustainable development, or is it just a neoliberal project? And you see already, I mean, this is of course very, drastic way of presenting it, but it's another example of, what I think helps students to broaden their minds and, hopefully contributing to critical social change. Last but not least, because you're probably also thinking, yeah, that's nice, but what about, the action part of it? The whole course really centers around working with different types of companies. You see them here, different type of companies on different projects. And what I find really important here is that it's not actually an exercise of, I don't know, whatever, Plastic Soup or NVU or Sweep Smart, whatever, any company or a municipality just comes in and says, here's the problem, just execute. I work in a way that people or students and teams continuously ask, so what is responsible innovation here? So responsible innovation is not, is a question rather than sort of an answer, a question and quest ongoing. And it's about trade-offs and finding synergies rather than having this, these sort of clear-cut answers, because obviously, they could just think, oh yeah, the course is called responsible innovation, everything is responsible, just like that. These are just final impressions from the final event. You just see them here, so they could actually show and tell their innovations or their project work at the final event. I think what is also interesting, and I think that's a bit more of a practical thing, but I mean, if you work, or at least how I work with students is, in that course, is that I actually have different types of deliverables, and I actually make the difference between academic and organizational deliverables. So the more action-oriented ones are the ones which are really also supervised by my partners, by the external partners with whom I work, and the more maybe reflective deliverables are the academic deliverables. And, for example, what I said in the beginning in Q1, would actually sort of, they have to hand in a context dossier in which they actually show me that they understand the problem in context, just as an example. And my final slide here is that, okay, so with all of that, okay, so what do you do? So in educating for impact, and I really hope that I educate responsible engineers for the future. This is also really what TU Eindhoven aims. So we want to educate engineers for the future. And I think that reflection and action is absolutely central here, absolutely central. And through this course, I'm really happy that, I mean, if people or students set up own student teams and keep on working on the projects which they worked on before, and of course the impact on their lives. Some of them actually get jobs in the companies, or And this is also a nice quote from a student who says, "We became aware that we are responsible for our own action and choices we make for the future." And with this, I'm going to stop here and hope that I could share some of the experiences I had. And maybe you have some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna, for presenting your course and the thoughts behind the design of the course. And now the floor is open to our members of the audience to ask any questions, make any comments. Please, Lucas.
Hello, thank you so much, Johanna, for this exciting talk. I was also lucky enough to join for the last event and to hear the student presentation, so I was very excited and impressed with that. I wanted to press you on the concept of responsibility here. You said responsibility and reflection. Students respond to ask, who do they respond to? Is it just whatever external stakeholders participate in the course, or what does it exactly mean to say that students have to respond to someone else?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, the connection was sometimes a bit bad. I'm just repeating the question. So how I understand is that you say, hey, responsibility, what does that really mean? Is that just responsibility to defend what they're doing for the company people or the organization people, or is that idea bigger? A little bit like, is that along these lines? Okay. Well, I mean, one of the things is that what I said in the beginning. So I think, and that relates also to the question very much in the beginning about entrepreneurship. In my course is not about helping Signify or any of the other external stakeholders to actually make money and actually sort of just let students just execute something there without many questions. My course is about students understanding the problem in context, which actually means that they have to say that if we actually mine and if we actually do some of the the latest feature by Apple, and we are actually bringing out yet another iPhone. So where do the materials, for example, come from? I'm just sort of now linking also back here to Susan. So and these are the questions they also raise with their own organizations. And because they are free, and because everyone knows that this is not just an execution or an ability, the responsibility is much broader. And responsibility is about sort of asking and trying to understand different perspectives on what an innovation has, because we also know decisions have to be made, and you decide for one and you decide against something else. So in the second quarter, for example, where they actually not only understand the problem in context, they actually have to make a decision matters book. They will actually have to decide, okay, we are going for X, Y, Z. But that we also know that we actually compromise, I don't know, the environment, or we compromise this or that. So I think the idea here is rather to make explicit, and I think we've heard that also before, make explicit the choices you make, and with that also the potential impact, positive or negative, you have. So I think that's the overall idea, because often I have the feeling that engineers or the students I teach, though are not yet so political or aware of trade-offs, they are becoming more and more aware of that. But I think that is something which that course really does, I would say.
Lucas, does this answer your question, or do you want to follow up on the response?
That's a fantastic answer. So I hear that the idea is that students can bring an external voice inside the company, and they can say things within the company and make certain things explicit that it would otherwise be not so easy or straightforward to bring them out in these contexts. So I guess the idea is that they make students reflective of what they can do, but they also do that for the company.
Yeah, I mean, I have a really nice example here. So I think oh, sorry, so the connection is bad. So sometimes I was too quickly. So I think one of the examples is that I work together with Hospitainer, and they work in crisis areas and bring hospitals in a container, Hospitainer. And what they were asked to make these hospitainers more, provide them with renewable energy. And what my students did was that say that's really nice. But what we also know that, there's this whole problem of solar waste that, we produce all these solar lanterns and these solar panels, and they will actually be being thrown into rural areas. So what they did is that they say, okay, we provide that, but we're also already thinking about what are we going to do about, making sure that these solar panels, for example, are just not sort of land in the backyards of people, in Uganda and other parts of Africa. So, and the point, I guess, and that relates to this issue of entrepreneurship. So as much as I welcome this idea of we have to have an entrepreneurial mindset, which is quite a trend, at least at TU Eindhoven, I think we should not, I don't even care if the middle business model doesn't work there. I don't care, because I think that is a question which is for out there. So I think, while they're still at university, I can actually be a bit more idealistic and a bit more critical, or actually a lot more critical than later. So I think, so that's sort of at least my time is, I'm not teaching about even sustainable business models, which I don't say that they're not important. But in my course, I decided clearly against that, and rather go on this rather critical, reflective, very much out there type of ideas.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions, thoughts, or new reactions to Johanna's presentation?
What majors do your students tend to come from? I'm assuming you have different engineering majors, and you said it's an elective class.
Yeah, I have everything. So I have applied physics, computer sciences, biomedical engineering. I have chemical engineering. I have industrial design. I have sustainable innovation. So it's really multidisciplinary, which of course also means that how do you cater to this bandwidth of people? And one of the things I do, and I think I can also only do there, is that I'm not so much about training, I guess, in depth. So I'm not only training chemical engineers in depth, but I rather sort of open up and say, anyone can do anything here. We are going, we have this idea of opening up everyone. That type of because you can't. I mean, you have to have that,
Yeah. And do all the departments accept your course as an elective for their curriculum?
Yeah.
And could you talk a little more about what you mean by academic deliverables versus organizational deliverables and the students' response to that?
Well, I mean, what I do is that what I know is that they love working with organizations. So because they have a hands-on project, they have the feeling they can do something. They work with real people, and it's not Johanna just telling them, okay, reflect on SDGs and why are they actually maybe only superficial or greenwashing, whatever. So I think, sorry, I'm just putting it a bit starky, but okay. So what I do is that with the academic deliverables, I ensure that they don't only sort of make nice time and work a little bit on their, I don't know, whatever, sort of solar panels for Hospitainer, but they actually also, for example, learn how to do research and find different perspectives on the problem, or that they actually are able to write a more or less well-reasoned, well-referenced article about what trade-offs they have about their responsible innovation. So this is what I call the responsible, like the academic deliverable. The organizational deliverable is much more related to the organizations, who can also say, this is what we want more or less, and it is a co-shaping idea. So the nice thing is that students can also come, again, the example of Hospitainer, where they said, we actually also have to think about what we do with the e-waste. And that means that they make it part of that organization deliverable at the end. So as you can see, so I have much more power and influence on the you know, sort of on the academic, where I say this is the minimum I want them to have when they leave my course. And the organizational is a bit more sort of also, it's more co-shaping. I also have a say, obviously, but it's more co-shaping, more open. And also the organizations with whom I work have a say in here.
Do they help contribute to the grading at the end? Like, do the students do a presentation for that, for the organization, and you and the organization both give input into the success?
Yeah, absolutely. I have 30%. Yeah, sorry, I didn't come with these details here, but so I have 30%, not in quartile one, like I have 3 quartiles with different emphases. And the first one was really about understanding the problem in context. And starting in the Q2 and Q3, they're actually evaluated by the companies, and it counts for 30%. And obviously, I mean, there's a whole rubric of that, and I always say is that I'm the last one who decides. I think that's even legal or something like this. So I think that's also, so I always can decide whether or not this is actually, well, you know, what grades they give. But I've never had problems there. So it's,
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, it's really cool.
You.
It's a really nice course.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing about it.
Corinne, I also see a comment from you on chat.
Hi, sorry, thank you for all the presentations, and Johanna for yours. I was asking about, and perhaps it's not a fair question to ask you, but I was asking about, do you see yourself as educating for social change? And is that in conflict with educating for economic development?
Oh, great question. If you push me hard, education for social change. Why? It's because what I hope will last is their critical mindset and their understanding of, oh, maybe we have to look at things different. So in that sense, I think it's definitely educating for social change. Educating for the social development, you know, to be honest, you can only do so much with a bachelor course in half a year contributing to social development in Nepal, for example. I mean, we did, you know, have some biogas stuff there, but I rather want them to see also the, you know, in that sense, you know, how difficult it is to really get things done on the ground, you know. And so I think here, you know, I also be very, very realistic, but I mean, I guess I think what lasts and where I can, I mean, I'm an educator in that sense, is that I can give them the analytical, critical skills of understanding what's happening around there. So that's at least what I see.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you, Corinne, for your question. Please feel welcome to raise your hand for any further questions or comments. And until then, I will have a question for both Susan and Johanna, as there was a mention of idealism in both of your talks and what it means in a way to be or to start your career as a young engineer as an idealist with an idealist viewpoint. And you, Johanna, you were mentioning that, you know, as a professor, as a part of academia, you can be more idealistic than someone that might be involved in such an endeavor outside academia. And my question about the idealism is, what would you recommend an idealist young lecturer, young early career teacher that wants to bring more social responsibility components into their teaching, and sometimes in this sort of resistance to those that, like Susan said, you know, are surprised by what social responsibility might entail? Where could such a early career lecturer start from?
Susan, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, so I'm a department head in addition to being a professor. I think it is important when you're early in your career to have the support of the leadership. So we are fortunate that our dean does support this work. I think it's really hard if you're not getting support from above, that it may be too risky. I think that it also depends how you do it, right? I mean, I feel like like once people see what I'm actually doing, it's not quite so out there and crazy, right? My hope is that as people see it, then they're able to do it. I think you have to follow your heart. Like, you need to do the things you're passionate about, but find ways in which they fit in with where you are. I don't know how the system works as well in Europe. I mean, in America, if you don't get tenure, your chances of having an impact are severely reduced. And so it is important to make sure you're meeting the expectations of where you are until you get to that point. I think there's also other ways in which you can contribute, and just making sure that what you're doing fits. To me, I always try to focus on those, like, what are the outputs? If you're an academic, our outputs are things like getting grants and doing publications. And so as long as you're doing those, you can argue for, academic freedom that we at least talk about in the United States means we can work on any topic we want, and it should be focused on what the outputs are, not on the, whether they like the topic that you're working on. I think the pushback from colleagues can be really difficult, especially if you're earlier in your career and those people have a say in whether or not you're going to continue in the career. So sort of being smart about that is important. It is hard when there's pushback from students, and hard to navigate some students who really aren't interested in this, right? So I think figuring a way to, like, open the conversation so they can be a part of it, but not letting them take over the conversation is challenging. I think it's not a coincidence that many of us interested in doing this work are not white men who students expect as their professor. And so sort of fighting against some of that. I'm very conscious that, my young faculty, when I have my young white male talk about this stuff, it goes over very differently than when I have a young Asian woman or a young Black woman do it. And it's important for me as a department head to make sure that I'm supporting all of them as they do this work. So I think finding some allies who have positions of power to support you doing it, and making sure you are doing things like what you're doing here in terms of engaging with the community and showing that there are other people that care about this. I find it very encouraging when I hear others that are doing this. I think a lot of students are really hungry for it, and our world is hungry for it. I mean, if we don't do this now and we don't try to, it's not us doing it, who's going to do it? We've clearly shown that the way we're doing things, business as usual, isn't working perfectly, and we need to do something different. But I think we have to be, a little bit careful of looking out for ourselves. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you.
And yes, having money from
maybe
NSF is very helpful if you can do this. Like, if you have outside people telling you that it's valuable.
And I think maybe in addition to all what has been said, I think, so at least in Europe, or at least in the Netherlands, there's the discussion going on reward, like, how do you say, recognition and reward, which basically means is that we actually try to go and value teaching and innovation and teaching more and more. So for for young ones, also teaching is more accepted as sort of as some kind of a asset you can show how good you are, how innovative you are in sort of in shaping your career. So I think that can be a good sign. So it's not only that you actually only have to the research, but you can also show that with teaching. So teaching as an asset in your career. So I guess that's sort of as an addition, at least what's happening here in the Netherlands. I guess a bit broader.
Thank you. Thank you for the two perspectives. Each is rooted in national particularities, the importance of the geographic context for such careers towards implementing responsibility in the engineering curricula. Are there further thoughts as we are approaching now the end of our event? So please raise your hand if you, Johanna and Susan, want also to leave your email address via chat. Corinne?
Sorry. Hello, and again, I apologize for not using my camera, but
No problem.
I hope to see people at SEFI maybe if all goes well later this year. But I just wanted to ask Susan, because she mentioned in one slide, she said that we need to focus on what we teach, but also how we teach. And I want to ask about, about the third consideration, which is whom we teach. Because of course, diversity with this kind of work, especially when you've got a range of people from different economic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different language, they've got different social capital, cultural capital, economic capital, and so on. So, you know, is that, do you deliberately engage with the diversity in the class, or is it not necessary?
Oh, I think it's critically important. I think as you try to acknowledge like your own positionality, the positionality of the students is also super important. And one of my big hopes in doing this work and showing engineering as a different thing is that we will attract some of the folks who didn't really see a place where they fit in engineering, and that will help us to have a wider perspective. I think ways in which we can appreciate what the students are bringing into our classroom are critically important. And that kind of, I think it undergirds all of it. I mean, it's part of my whole motivation for doing this is I want other folks, everybody doesn't have to be an engineer, but I would like more people to at least consider it so that they have the option and they're making an informed choice. And nothing makes me happier than when I have someone who, I just had someone a couple of weeks ago who said, I was giving up on engineering and I was going to quit and go to business. And then I went to the NSBE, which is the National Society of Black Engineers. I went to the NSBE conference and now I have to be an engineer. And my buddy said I should look at integrated engineering. Because now I can take some of his business classes and put them in the concentration. So it's not like, okay, well, you got to pick whether you want engineering or business. Like I'm still going to make sure that we're accredited, but I'm not going to make you take only engineering classes. I recognize that supply chain is interesting too, and that could be valuable. And if you can make a curriculum that makes sense for you, awesome. So, which like totally, like that's a huge success, I think. Even if it doesn't work out for him, the fact that he could at least say, I want to explore this, like maybe this is a possibility how I can fit. And that's a huge win. Like I want all those students to come over to me and be maybe in a classroom where they don't have to be the only one. Because I feel like they bring such richness. Some of the other work we've done is around the idea of culturally sustaining pedagogy, which some of that is the idea that students are bringing richness into the classroom. Can we find a way to relate to that so that they don't feel like they have to leave everything at the door? I think some students have felt like the examples speak to them. You know, like if you're really into cars and rockets, then a lot of the examples we use in engineering are great. They resonate with you. I've never been all that into cars or rockets, but I've like sucked it up and did whatever examples they had. But could we broaden the examples that are in there? So we talk about straightening hair when we're talking about energy instead of just talking about other things that engines and machines and stuff. Can we broaden it so that maybe all the examples don't appeal to everybody, but maybe everybody finds something where they plug in, so people could see engineering knowledge again as not so elitist and not just for these things that we don't really understand what they have to deal with, but for what we do in our lives, so that maybe we can use this engineering in a better way. I think it's critically important. I think it's very contextual. I mean, you're in South Africa, your context is a lot different than mine, but we have a lot of issues in the United States of trying to promote access to folks. And I think engineering, we need to change who we are and how we do things so that we're more welcoming, instead of trying to make the other folks who haven't felt welcome fit themselves into it. We've already seen how many of them are willing to fit into what we have. We need to change so that more of them really do fit, so they can bring things in.
Thank you so much. It's, you know, it's so encouraging and inspiring to be in this community where people have similar ideas to you and insights, and have this plural notion, or the notion of a plural engineering identity, or plural identities, because of course many people don't ever trouble that notion and just think of the mainstream technical engineering science person as the engineer. Thank you to everyone, and thank you to you as well, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you to all those who trust their time and give up 2 hours from their busy schedules to be with us, even if it is for one seminar or our more regular presence. And I hope this is a community for each of you, maybe not one that has answers to every problem, but one in which we can work together and have these discussions where we doubt ourselves, where we change our own minds, and where we can learn from each other. And it's a great pleasure to learn every time so much from the speakers. We have, I'd say, one more minute, and I would give maybe the floor to Ji Gao. I don't remember seeing you to our previous events, just to share your comment with us before we say goodbye. As you are mentioning the topic of power.
Yeah, so I added on the chat, I had this thought from the very first talk that it matters to really so the diagram Darshan proposed was on the interactions between different capitals and how they map onto this in and out of field for environmentally just and socially just practice. And I thought that it would be useful to really see the interconnection in overlap between these capitals and how they could be taught in a more scaffold way, and maybe some capitals cannot be taught, and some are have different currencies in the industry and in society. So we should also take care of that in curriculum. I'm just joining this community for the first time. I'm really happy to meet all of you on Zoom, and I hope I will come more often and share with you my observations. Thank you.
You are very welcome to be with us, and also for everyone who is present, feel welcome to share news about your research articles, about your events that might be of interest to our community. We try to reach beyond Europe, and we have a monthly newsletter together with my colleague Hunter Bombards, and we are very happy to share news about your work. Thank you, and have a good remaining of the week. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Johanna. It was very inspirational to hear you, and I'm looking forward to finding out more in the future about your work.